So, Myrtle, obviously you're so much more than that incredible CV. And I was wondering, there is something about this magnificent trajectory of your career that I know about, but few people know about, that was one of those deep life-inflecting moments that a lot of your achievements really come from great fear and tragedy to some extent, and then, in a way, rebirth. Do you mind sharing that with everybody here?
Sure.
What happened when you were, I'd like to believe it was only a few years ago, but, but it was a few more years than that. But
yes.
you had a drug interaction that almost cost you your life.
Yes.
And I don't know if people really, it's not on your LinkedIn profile, of course.
No. Yes, when I was 45 years old, I was getting ready for a horse show. I used to jump horses competitively, came off a horse, damaged my shoulder very severely, and was given a medication to stop the formation of scar tissue. As a result of taking that medication, I ended up essentially with total organ failure. Almost died at the age of 45. Just to give you a sense of how serious it was, my creatinine levels were 9.2, 9.4.
Wow.
Yes, I was in the ICU at Stanford, called my family, and my family, my children prepared to bury me, to have services.
Incredible, just incredible. You know, we think
yes.
we always think of the work we do in our industry in terms of the lens of life-saving, and
yes.
here suddenly for you it was life-threatening. Now you were at the time one of the and still are, but you were at that point at the helm of Genentech.
Yes, I was.
I mean, you obviously made a shift. What was the thinking process behind that moment and the moment where you decided to really become, I would say, incredibly expansive, hyper-focused,
yes.
and incredibly expansive simultaneously?
Yes.
What was going on for you?
Well, you know, honestly, it was absolutely traumatic for me. It took me over a year to recover. When I got out of the hospital, I couldn't see well enough to drive. I couldn't walk. I walked with a walker. And after coming through that experience, I asked myself a fundamental question. And that was, with everything that I had accomplished, what was I really going to do next to really make a difference? And I'd lived my life with a goal of always making a difference, always taking something farther. Everything that I touch, that's my personal goal. I still operate with that today. But at that time, the question was, what is that next thing?
Wow. Now, you have sort of like two big professional hats you're wearing right now.
Yes.
One is Myrtle Potter Advisors, which is this sort of almost incredible think tank you've assembled. I know you have you tap into 50 amazing minds. Probably some of the minds out here might be in that think tank, and you're sort of taking on big, sort of game-changing healthcare challenges.
Yes.
And then also you have this other hat that you're wearing that has become equally expansive, your role as Chief Operating Officer at Rovant. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing with both of these entities right now? And obviously I want to hear about Rovant because it's a very different model, and I think it's a very productive model. So,
yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
So when I left Genentech and recovered, I made the decision that I really was going to devote my life to helping my industry that I love so much really push itself in ways that I thought it hadn't done before. So I formed Myrtle Potter and Company and took on the commitment that every effort and project we took on would have a goal buried within it to take the company to another level, whatever client we were working with. And as I was doing that, about, I guess around, it's now about 9 months ago, I was approached by Rovant Sciences to come and help them rethink the process of, and the question of the industrial model for pharmaceuticals.
So let me interrupt you for a second on that. You know,
yes.
I'm very conscious as someone who loves history of great civilizations rising and falling, and nations sort of like rising and falling, and
yes.
even iconic companies rising,
Exactly.
like IBM has risen, fallen, risen
Yes.
again. When you think of our industry,
Yes.
I sense in the words you just said a little bit of fear, anxiety for us. Is that correct?
Oh, I worry. I do worry. I worry about our industry. I think our industry has created so much value over decades, but I'm not convinced that the industrial model that produces pharmaceuticals today will be the same model that will produce pharmaceuticals 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now. And it is at the core of this belief that, that gave me the impetus to be open to other opportunities. So I had been thinking about the industrial model for pharmaceuticals for quite some time with my team and my company. And then I was approached by Vivek Ramaswamy, the founder of Roivant Sciences. I was asked to be the Vant operating chair, and I was just inspired by the vision. And the vision of Roivant is to be able to set up smaller, more facile, more organized pharmaceutical companies, independent companies, using data as an enabler to drive the speed of drug development and also drive the speed and the sophistication of commercialization. From my perspective, that has to happen if our industry is going to survive and if we're going to fulfill what is a real obligation to continue to bring medicines to people who need them.
Now, I understand that the vision is also sort of produced. You've been incredibly productive.
Yes.
Can you talk about that sense of the bridge between a great idea, great operating leader, and productivity across these companies? I understand that collectively you have a pipeline that most major pharmaceutical companies would beg for.
We do. We currently have 30 programs in development. We have 5 programs in phase 3 or later, a BLA that's been filed with the FDA in a rolling submission. We have a number of programs in phase 2 and preclinical, but 35 programs altogether, that's huge. We also have guiding and ushering these programs 12 individual drug companies. 4 are public, the others are private, and we are standing up these companies at a speed that is simply unprecedented.
What, from your successful experience right now with Roivant,
Yes.
what, if you were to say to the pharmaceutical industry that you come from, that you in a way you helped create the modern pharmaceutical industry
Yes.
through your work, what 3 lessons would you say, hey, in my situation here, what I've learned is X, Y, and Z. Take note.
Oh, I love that question. I love your question. I think the first thing I would say is when you have tried so hard to make fundamental shifts in your industry and what you do, the lesson for me is that the answers may not be within the pharmaceutical industry. The lessons may be coming out of Amazon. The lessons may be coming out of Alphabet. They may be coming out of Facebook in terms of how we think about the basic business model and the use of technology in driving value. So that would be one lesson. The next lesson I would say is we have to be brave enough and aggressive enough and confident enough to think expansively about the possibilities of what it means to deliver medicine and care. We think about delivering medicines in terms of pills and bottles, but the future may not look like that. It may be that there's a confluence, and I'll use Proteus Digital Health as an example, where I'm a board member, where we have digital sensors inside of pills that patients take that read out really important data that can be informative for physicians. There may be just a different kind of confluence of things that come together when we think about medicine and we think about pills.
Now, so you're talking about the confluence of technologies. Do you think that big pharma has the capacity to sort of pull all of that together in terms of the model that they're sort of rooted to right now? will there be companies that will be bold enough to say, based on our capitalization, our scale, our minds, our urgency, that we really need to reorganize in some way around that model?
I think Big Pharma has the ability to do it, and I often believe that they have the will to do it, but I do believe that scale, as powerful as it is in terms of producing large volumes of products, scale is not always your friend when it comes to innovation.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that experimentation is great in terms of thinking fundamentally about different ways to do things. And the worst that's going to happen is that you're going to fail. The worst that's going to happen is you're going to make a mistake. And if you can get past the fear of looking bad because you didn't do something right, you can actually do really great things.
So I'm going to ask a tricky question right now. And you have been in the spotlight having to deal with these issues before. The role of our industry, our health industry as innovators,
Yes.
and dealing with the expectation of investors, whether they be shareholders on the public market or private investors.
Yes.
How do people in this room who are innovators, what do you think the core issue that they have to tell their investors to sort of like get their investors to understand that innovation doesn't happen overnight? And also, to your point, we're living in a fragmented health system.
Yes.
What words of counsel do you have for our attendees?
Gosh, that's a great question. I think the first thing I would say is never forget that investors invest in people. People. Very, very key. Investors invest in ideas. Together, that makes, that's just magic when things go right. I think that as progressive as our technology is becoming, we have to remember that investors really come down to simple, investable business theses. And oftentimes when I see wonderful ideas not be adopted, it's because there's been difficulty in translating the elegance of the idea into a simple, investable thesis that an investor can understand. I think the other thing it's important to remember is that investors like different types of things. And so while you might be working your network and being connected with investors that just invested in idea number A that perhaps a colleague or a friend of yours has just developed, that same investor just simply may not be into what you have. And so you really have to cultivate and be discerning about who you're trying to bring in to attract to your ideas.
I have to thank you so much for being with us here today. You are an inspiration and a role model for many of us. Many of us who had the chance to see you at different stages of your career are not surprised at what you're achieving and your contributions. You said something that I really want to leave this audience with that I think is one of the most powerful things that we can take away from this conversation, your passion to make a difference.
Yeah.
And I hope that we in this room live up to your expectations. Myrtle, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.